Danielle Brooks gripped the leather steering wheel of her sleek black Mercedes-Benz as she cruised through the quiet suburban streets of Brookfield Heights. The neighborhood was picturesque, lined with blooming dogwoods, manicured lawns, and children playing on bikes. She had always appreciated the peacefulness of this area, especially in the early morning hours. Today, she wore a tailored navy blue suit, a cream blouse, and modest gold earrings. Her short, natural curls were neatly styled, and her presence radiated confidence and composure. She was on her way to a meeting at the state capitol, one she was expected to lead. As she approached a stop sign, she noticed a patrol car parked across the street. 2 white officers sat inside, watching her with narrowed eyes. Officer Grant, the older of the two, with a grizzled jaw and impatient demeanor, nudged his partner. Officer Miller, younger and jumpy, glanced at Danielle's car with a furrowed brow. "That car looks out of place," Grant muttered. "You thinking what I'm thinking," Miller replied. Without waiting for more, Grant flipped on the lights and pulled out behind Danielle's vehicle. She saw the flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror and let out a soft sigh. Calmly, she signaled and pulled over to the curb, turning off the engine. She reached into her glove compartment for her license and registration, already preparing for what was to come. Officer Grant approached the driver's side with a heavy step, hand hovering near his holster. "License and registration," he barked. Danielle handed over her documents without hesitation. "May I ask what I'm being pulled over for, officer?" "Your vehicle matches the description of a stolen car, reported this morning," Grant said, his voice flat. Danielle raised an eyebrow slightly. "This car is registered in my name. You'll find that both my license and registration are current." Miller circled the car, peering through the windows, as though expecting to find something illegal. Danielle remained still, her hands visible on the steering wheel. She had been through enough to know exactly how quickly situations like this could escalate. Grant glanced at the documents, but his skepticism didn't fade. "You have ID to prove this is your car, and yet you're still here, driving through a neighborhood you don't look like you belong in." Danielle blinked slowly, her composure unwavering. "Officer, I'm a licensed attorney. I live 10 minutes from here. I've done nothing wrong." Instead of acknowledging her, Grant nodded at Miller. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am. We need to search the car." "I do not consent to a search," she replied evenly. "Unless you have probable cause." "We don't need a lecture," Miller snapped. "Step out now, or we'll help you out." Danielle took a breath, eyes steady. "You're making a mistake." But the officers weren't listening. They had already decided who she was based on nothing more than the color of her skin and the kind of car she drove, and they were about to learn just how wrong they were. Danielle's fingers remained motionless on the steering wheel, her breath steady, even as her heart rate began to rise. Officer Grant's tone had shifted from firm to hostile, and Officer Miller now stood inches from her passenger side window, tapping impatiently with the edge of his flashlight. "I've already given you my license and registration," Danielle repeated calmly. "If you just run the information, you'll see everything checks out. I'm on my way to a scheduled meeting with the Attorney General." Grant scowled. "Step out of the car, now." Danielle looked him directly in the eye. "I haven't broken any laws. I don't consent to a search. I've complied fully. You're detaining me without cause. You're resisting," Miller said sharply from the other side. "We're not going to argue with you all day." Within moments, Grant reached for the door handle, yanked the door open, and ordered her to get out. Danielle didn't resist. She slowly unbuckled her seatbelt, collected her purse, and stepped out with dignity. Her heels clicked softly against the pavement. "Turn around," Grant ordered. "Hands behind your back." "You're making a serious mistake," Danielle said evenly, as she felt the cold steel of the handcuffs clamp around her wrists. Her arms were pulled behind her roughly, the pressure tight and unnecessary. She didn't wince, but the sting of the cuffs bit into her skin. A few cars slowed down. One driver rolled down their window and stared. Another pulled out their phone and began filming. Across the street, a mother walking her dog stopped mid-step, eyes wide with disbelief. The sight of a black woman in a power suit being handcuffed in broad daylight on a quiet street drew attention quickly. "What's the charge?" someone called out from a passing car. "She driving while black," another muttered from the sidewalk. Grant ignored them. Miller, however, seemed to enjoy the growing spectacle. "Finally caught one of these types, trying to act like she runs the world," he muttered, loud enough for Danielle to hear. Danielle turned her head slightly, her eyes locking with his. "You have no idea who you're talking to," Miller laughed, patting Grant on the shoulder. "Bet she's one of those fake professionals. Probably used a fake ID too." Grant grunted. "Let's bring her in and let the station sort it out. Maybe then she'll stop running her mouth." Despite the humiliation, Danielle's posture remained upright. She didn't struggle, she didn't cry, but her silence spoke volumes. As they led her to the squad car, her expensive heels clicked rhythmically against the concrete, echoing louder than the surrounding noise. She climbed into the back seat without resistance, her eyes forward, her jaw set. She said just one more thing before the door slammed shut. "I hope your supervisor is ready for what comes next." Neither officer paid attention. They believed they were in control. They couldn't have known the storm they'd just unleashed. At the police station, the atmosphere shifted from tense to uneasy as Danielle was led into the booking area. She was no longer a well-dressed woman in an expensive car. She was just another suspect, processed like anyone else. The officers removed her handcuffs and guided her to a cold metal bench. A desk sergeant, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and a tired expression, motioned for her to sit. "Name?" the sergeant asked, his tone clinical. "Danielle Brooks." He typed her name into the system, his fingers tapping the keys without a second thought. A moment later, the screen in front of him flickered briefly, and he frowned. "Address?" he asked, still not looking up. Danielle gave her home address, and as the sergeant continued typing, she noticed a shift in his demeanor. His fingers paused mid-type as he glanced at the monitor again, then back at her, this time with a slight furrow in his brow. He cleared his throat and went on with the routine, taking her fingerprints, then a quick mugshot. But something was clearly off. As he completed the process, he passed her off to a younger officer, who started to lead her down the hall to the holding cells. "Wait," Danielle said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm requesting one phone call." The young officer hesitated, but nodded. "Fine, you get one call. Make it quick." Danielle pulled her phone from her bag and dialed the number of her assistant, Maria, at the state prosecutor's office. The phone rang several times before Maria picked up. "Danielle, where are you? I've been trying to reach you." Maria's voice came through, urgent but confused. "Maria, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Danielle replied, her tone steady, but with an edge of seriousness. "I've been arrested by the Brookfield Heights police. I need you to call the governor's office, the attorney general, and anyone else you can think of. Let them know that I am in custody, and this situation is completely unjust." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end. "What? Arrested for what?" Maria gasped. "They pulled me over for no reason. They didn't find anything illegal, but they're holding me here anyway. They think I'm just another suspect. I need you to handle this now." Maria stammered in disbelief. "I'll make the calls right now." "Stay calm, Danielle. I'll get you out of there. Don't waste time. Just do it," Danielle said, cutting the call short before Maria could say more. As soon as the phone clicked off, Danielle was escorted back to the holding area. A couple of officers had begun to murmur among themselves, their eyes flicking between Danielle and the sergeant at the desk. Word had clearly spread fast, and it wasn't long before the whispers turned into full conversations. It was only when one officer recognized her name. Wait, did she just say Danielle Brooks's, the prosecutor, that things started to shift? The desk sergeant's face went white as he stared at the monitor once more, confirming what he had already begun to suspect. The woman they had just arrested wasn't just anyone. She wasn't some random motorist they had the right to treat with disdain. They had just arrested the chief prosecutor of the state. The moment the news reached the police chief, he dropped everything and rushed to the station. He wasn't prepared for the chaos that followed. The call had come through from a state official. The name Danielle Brooks had sent shockwaves through the department. It wasn't just any prosecutor who had been arrested. It was the chief prosecutor, the woman who held significant power in the justice system. He couldn't believe it. Chief Reynolds arrived at the station in a panic, his face flushed and eyes wide with disbelief. As he stormed through the front doors, his footsteps echoed down the hallway, drawing the attention of the officers and staff present. He didn't bother to stop at his desk. Instead, he made a beeline for the booking area. "Where is she?" Chief Reynolds demanded, his voice sharp with urgency. The desk sergeant, still processing what had just unfolded, stood up quickly. "She's in holding, Chief. We just what? We just arrested the chief prosecutor of the state, and you didn't think to call me." The chief's voice boomed, cutting the sergeant off mid-sentence. "We didn't know, Chief. She gave us a name, and we didn't." The sergeant stammered. "You didn't check," Reynolds snapped. "Get her out of there, now." The officers who had been involved in the arrest, including Officers Grant and Miller, shuffled awkwardly in the background. Their faces were pale as they overheard the exchange, and they knew the gravity of the situation had just hit full force. Officer Grant stepped forward, trying to salvage the situation. "Chief, we didn't know. We were just doing our jobs. You know, the car was suspicious, and the car was suspicious." Chief Reynolds interrupted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You've just arrested the highest-ranking prosecutor in this state over a suspicion. You're going to have to do better than that." Grant and Miller stood in stunned silence, realizing they were no longer the ones in control. The chief turned his attention to them, his gaze cold and stern. "Both of you will be placed on administrative leave while Internal Affairs conducts an investigation. You'll have to answer for your actions, proper channels, like you've heard. Now get out of my sight." The two officers nodded stiffly, their heads hanging low as they turned and walked away. They had no excuse left to offer. Word spread quickly across the station, and soon the media picked up on the story. A phone call from Maria had already gone through to several state-level officials, alerting them to the egregious mistake made by the Brookfield Heights police. As the first news outlet went live, the story snowballed. By the time the cameras were rolling, bystanders' video footage from the incident was already circulating online. The footage showed Danielle being roughly handled, humiliated in broad daylight, and her calm response in the face of blatant injustice. Social media exploded with outrage. Hashtags like "Justice for Danielle" and "Stop Police Racism" spread across Twitter, sparking protests and support from citizens, community leaders, and advocacy groups. Back at the station, Internal Affairs had already been called in. An investigation would begin immediately, but the damage had already been done. The mayor's office and the governor's office were informed, with both issuing public statements about the severity of the incident. The pressure was mounting, and the officers involved knew they were in deep trouble. Danielle, however, was still in holding, calm and composed, waiting for the inevitable fallout to unfold. Her composure only added to the intensity of the situation. As news of Danielle Brooks's arrest spread,
The nation watched with bated breath. What had initially seemed like a routine traffic stop turned into a full-blown crisis, exposing the deep-seated racial biases within law enforcement. Social media was flooded with the video footage of Danielle being handcuffed and taken away in front of an audience of stunned onlookers. The incident sparked protests in cities across the country, with people of all backgrounds demanding justice for Danielle and an end to police brutality. In Brookfield Heights, the protests began small, just a handful of concerned citizens holding signs and chanting outside the police station. But within hours, the number of demonstrators swelled, and soon the town square was filled with people rallying for justice. Local community leaders, including pastors and activists, spoke out against the systemic racism that had led to Danielle's arrest. Civil rights organizations, including the ACLU, released statements calling for an independent investigation into the police officers involved. The outrage grew louder as more details emerged. Officer Grant and Officer Miller were placed on paid administrative leave, while the investigation was launched by Internal Affairs. The town was divided. Some expressed sympathy for the officers, claiming the arrest was a misunderstanding, while others rallied around Danielle, calling for accountability and reform within the police department. Danielle, meanwhile, remained resolute. She had been humiliated, but she refused to let this experience define her. The morning after the protests began, Danielle made a powerful public statement from her attorney's office, addressing the press with poise and conviction. She spoke directly to the camera, her voice unwavering. "I want to be clear," she began. "What happened to me is not just about me. It's about every black person in this country who has been judged not by their actions, not by their character, but by the color of their skin. I've spent my career upholding justice, but what I experienced yesterday was the very opposite of justice. It was a direct result of systemic racial bias that continues to plague our law enforcement agencies." She paused, her eyes steely with determination. "They didn't arrest me because I broke the law. They arrested me because I didn't fit their preconceived notions of what a criminal looks like. I was targeted because of the car I drive, the way I look, and the fact that I'm a black woman in a position of power. This is not an isolated incident. This is happening every day, all across this country, and it needs to stop." Her words resonated with millions, and the video of her statement quickly went viral. People praised her for her strength and clarity, and the hashtag #JusticeForDanielle gained traction on social media. As public outrage mounted, political leaders weighed in. The governor of the state, Governor Linda Williams, held a press conference where she unequivocally supported Danielle. "What happened to Miss Brooks is unacceptable, and I stand with her in demanding justice," the governor said. "We will ensure that this investigation is thorough and transparent. We will work toward reforms that address the biases that allowed this to happen." The police department, under intense pressure, announced that it would be launching a comprehensive review of its policies and practices, including mandatory anti-bias training for all officers. The mayor, too, voiced his support for change, acknowledging that this was a wake-up call for the entire community. Though the investigation was far from over, the ground had shifted beneath the feet of the officers involved. Danielle had turned her humiliation into a powerful platform for change, and her calm, dignified response had made it clear that the fight for justice wasn't just about one woman. It was about something much bigger. The investigation into Officer Grant and Officer Miller's conduct progressed quickly. Internal Affairs conducted a thorough review of the incident, but as they dug deeper, they uncovered a disturbing pattern of misconduct. The two officers had been involved in previous questionable stops, where they had made baseless arrests and falsely reported incidents. The evidence was clear: they had targeted people based on racial biases, and their actions were no longer just a matter of negligence, they were criminal. The fallout was swift. Officer Grant was fired immediately, and Officer Miller followed suit just hours later. But the consequences didn't stop there. As the investigation unfolded, it became apparent that Officer Miller had falsified the police report surrounding Danielle's arrest, intentionally misrepresenting the facts in order to cover up their mistakes. For this he was criminally charged with falsifying official records and making false statements in an official report. The news reverberated throughout the country. People who had followed Danielle's case were both relieved and vindicated. The system had finally worked, but not before it had taken a toll on a woman who had been humiliated and wronged. Danielle, however, didn't dwell on her personal vindication. She had always known that justice was a process, sometimes slow, sometimes painful, but ultimately, it was about holding those in power accountable. Danielle was asked to lead a task force focused on police accountability, aimed at addressing the systemic issues that had allowed her arrest to occur. She worked alongside community leaders, legal experts, and other state officials to draft new policies designed to reform law enforcement practices. Her initiative included measures for better officer training, particularly on racial bias and de-escalation tactics. Additionally, it proposed transparency in police conduct, such as body cameras and public access to reports on police activity. While she was deeply committed to this cause, she never lost sight of the fact that this work was about more than just one incident. It was about ensuring that every person, regardless of their background, was treated fairly and equally under the law. Months later, Danielle's work culminated in a groundbreaking public address at a packed auditorium at the prestigious Harvard Law School. The event had drawn a full crowd of law students, faculty, and legal professionals. Danielle was invited to speak as part of a series of lectures on ethics and criminal justice. As she stepped onto the stage, a wave of pride swept over her. She had come a long way from the humbling moment of her arrest to becoming a beacon of reform in the justice system. Her message was clear and powerful. To all of you in this room, future lawyers, future prosecutors, remember that with power comes responsibility. Danielle began, her voice steady but impassioned. The law is not just a set of rules, it is the framework through which we ensure fairness, dignity, and respect for all people. It is our duty, as legal professionals, to hold the system accountable, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it feels like the odds are stacked against us. She paused for a moment, letting the weight of her words sink in. The criminal justice system is not perfect, but it is our job to ensure that it gets better, that it serves everyone equally. We are the stewards of justice, and we must never forget the responsibility that comes with that. Never forget that the choices you make as a lawyer, as a prosecutor, can change lives. They can change the course of history. The room fell silent as Danielle's words resonated with everyone present. She had turned her painful experience into a powerful lesson for future generations of legal professionals. Her message was one of hope, of unwavering determination, and of a commitment to creating a more just world. As the applause erupted around her, Danielle knew that her work was far from over, but for the first time she felt a deep sense of peace. She had fought for justice, and had won.